Well, hey guys, I'm here in my kitchen pretending to do the dishes so that I can tell you a little bit about what's coming up in this podcast. On April 13, we had a special service where we continued to talk about some of the distinctives about Pivot 613. Now, these are things that might make Pivot 613 a little different from other churches you might know. Not better, just different. So to talk about these things, we had a panel discussion so you could hear from various other people involved at Pivot and find out what they were thinking. And we held that discussion in the kitchen, because in most homes, that's where the really deep, meaty discussions happen. It's where people gravitate to when they want to find out what's really going on. So we talked way too much because we get a little excited about some of these sorts of things. So we've broken up the discussion podcast into two parts. This first part deals with the pillars of accessibility, creativity, and excellence. So enjoy this first part of our kitchen panel discussion on Pivot's distinctives while I pretend to finish drying these dishes.
Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us in the kitchen. We wanted to be able to have a moment to have a kitchen talk. You know, families generally get the important conversations done in their kitchens or around their kitchen tables, and so we wanted to have one of our important looking under the hood conversations happening here. The reason for all of this is because we're also recording a podcast. We put out a podcast once a month, and it's usually just some updates about Pivot 613 and some of the stuff that we've found out, figured out, learned, and also useful information. So this Sunday we wanted to be sure to put out, this month we wanted to be sure to put out another podcast, and we figured that it would be about our discussion about distinctives. So I'm going to now switch to my notes and stop ad-libbing, and hopefully I'll make better sense than this. Sometimes when I speak to people about Pivot 613, I get the feeling that they're not persuaded about the seriousness of the calling that we felt when we started this movement. The reason for this is that they don't think there's anything distinguishable about us. And they don't think that there is anything different about us that would help us bring people to faith that in different ways than other faith communities. And even after brief conversations, usually you see that the light hasn't turned on. And the truth is that if we're being fair about this conversation about Christian faith movement, there's a lot about us that looks the same. The things that will distinguish us, though, are the things that we hope we will put emphasis on, and we feel that these things are the ones that God is calling us to specifically as a faith community, and we've done a lot of thinking and writing about them. Last week, if you were here, we talked about 4 pillars, pillars or distinctives. We're calling them pillars or distinctives. We have 8 of them, and last week we talked about 4 of them, and we hope that as we pursue them, they will become a kind of calling card for Pivot 613. They will become the DNA of our community. Just like the early group of Jesus followers distinguished themselves from the faith community out of which they were planted, we hope that as we follow Jesus' call on us, we will distinguish ourselves. And not only will these things distinguish us, but they will become the things that allow us to draw people to Christ that are not yet being met, and allow us to disciple them in his teaching. And so the 4 pillars that we talked about last week were living simply, acting justly, loving mercy, and walking humbly. If you missed our discussion from last weekend, which was awesome, we had a lot of people in that room, you can check out the conversation starter that we used. It's on our website. It's about 12 minutes long, and it's just me setting up a little bit of the discussion and asking 5 questions that I think are poignant for that. So once again, the pillars that we talked about last week are living simply, acting justly, walking humbly, and loving mercy. Living simply, acting justly, walking humbly, and loving mercy. So this week we would like to take an opportunity to talk about 4 other pillars. And These pillars build on top of that. They're the pillars of accessibility, creativity and excellence, multiculturalism and multi-ethnicity, and theological diversity. This week, I'm not going to do all the talking. I'm going to share this discussion time with other people that have helped that are helping me lead this and have helped me do the thinking about it. And so I'm going to introduce Jim. And those of you that are watching the podcast and haven't been here for the service, you've seen Jim on the podcast a lot and doing our Pivot Minute. And Jim is the creative tour de force behind everything we do. And Wendy is his wife. Wendy is sitting right next to him, and Wendy is
the tour de force behind.
Yes, the tour de force behind the tour de force, and they are some of the smartest people I know. And the fact that they are on this journey and Pivot 613 with me kind of gives me confidence that what we're doing is not just in my head, but God inspired. As well, at some point, we will have Angela join us in the discussion. So let's jump right into it and let's talk a little bit about accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, we want to be a church that has a pillar of accessibility. What do we mean by this, and how is it going to work out?
I see accessibility as like putting the cookie jar out on the counter and taking the lid off. Mm-hmm. It's really making it easy to get into. You know, anybody can just walk along, put their hand in, grab a cookie. It's right there. It's easy to get to. So part of it is about the language that we use to talk about things, to make sure that people can understand it. But it's more than just the language too. It's really about removing all of the barriers that there might be to barriers to communication and barriers to people becoming part of the community.
Then why is this like a big deal for us?
It's really important because Jesus gave us a message, and our job is to communicate that to the world. Mm-hmm. But there's more to communication than just saying the message. There's two ends of it, right? There's the transmitting end, and then there's the receiving end. So if the message is not received, then the communication has failed. So we need to do everything we can, not just to say the message, but to make sure that it is able to be received on the other end.
So we've had 10 weeks under our belt of Pivot 613. Now, full disclosure, we're still testing it out. That's why we call this the soft launch phase. And if you're visiting, we're 100% in a soft launch phase because we're just trying to make sure that we work out the kinks of what we're doing, but also gather people together and build community. And what are some of the ways that we have tried to open the cookie jar and put the cookies out?
Well,
have we done a good job with it? Are we?
I think we're working on it. We're working on it. We're getting there. We're doing things like, making sure there's someone in the lobby when people come in, so that they can point people in the right direction. Even something as simple as that is removing a barrier. It's making people feel like, we're glad you're here. Even if we've never met you before, we're glad you're here. We want to make sure that you can get to where the action is. We want to make sure that you understand everything that's being said, that you know where things are, you know how it works. We care that it makes sense to everyone, not just people who've been coming all of those 10 weeks, but every time there could be new people, and we want them to feel just as welcomed and just as valued. And we're working on it. We're trying. We're getting better, hopefully, every week.
Yes, and it's something that we want all of us to participate in, because we've all been to those communities where the greeting of people and making people feel welcome is the job of the people at the door and outside in the parking lot, and the people actually sitting in the pews and chairs tend not to do such a good job of it. So we want to make this something that we do 100%. And how does this make us distinct?
Well, I think that a lot of churches understand that accessibility is important. It can be easy to kind of lose the focus on it over time, though. It does take a little bit extra time, a little bit of extra effort. Sometimes it means what feels like a lot of repetition to the people who are here every week. But hopefully what we will make ourselves distinct by is in keeping it as a consistent focus over time. This week, next week, in a year, in 5 years, we hope there will still be new people coming in every week, and we want to make sure that every week we explain things so that every new person feels welcome and feels valued.
Yes, one of the things that I find the longer you sort of hang out in Christian community is that you develop language and slang that makes perfect sense to you, but doesn't make perfect sense to people that are visiting. And so you kind of have to go in and explain all those things. Like, I don't know, it's not coming to mind some of the things that we say. Do you guys remember? So, like, we've been Christians for forever and faith communities for forever. And so
Well,
it sounds natural to me, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in churches where they've done a really good job at branding their kids programs, for instance.
Yes.
And ages 4 to 6 will be the Red Robins, and ages 7 to 8 will be the Blue Jays. And when they just stand up at the front and they say all the Red Robins can go to their class now, and parents are going like, what?
Who are the Red Robins?
Yeah, exactly. Is this a baseball team in here? What's going on? So it's things like that the sort of shorthand that will end up developing, and if we're not careful and conscious about it, we need to make sure that all that sort of stuff is clear.
And I feel that it ties in very well with trying to walk humbly, which is one of the things that we talked about last week. Is that if you understand that we're all trying to serve each other, and that and you consider other people better than yourself,
Yep.
whether they be visitors or just people that have been a part of the community for a long time, you try to make your message accessible. Let's jump forward. Creativity and excellence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mr. Creative tour de force.
No pressure. No pressure.
Aren't all? It's a question that it's a question that I wrote down this week as I was thinking about this. Aren't all churches trying to be creative and excellent? What do we mean by this, and how will it work out?
I think it's important to differentiate between excellence and perfectionism, because those are terms that are often confused for each other. When we say excellence, it's doing the absolute best that we can with the resources that we have available. It doesn't mean that we expect it to be perfect. It means we're not going to be satisfied with a second-rate effort, because it's worth the effort to give a first-rate effort. Former pastor of mine used to have a saying. He said, "The story is worth a good telling." And that's part of excellence, is realizing the importance of the message, like you were talking about, realizing that the message is that important that we need to really give it our best shot at all the aspects that we're doing, whether it's music or speaking from the stage or the website or anything like that. We need to do our best with what we've got available. As far as the creativity aspect of it, that's more about it's difficult sometimes to figure out exactly where the accessibility and creativity and excellence, where they all kind of start and stop. They're all kind of part of the same ball of wax.
Yes.
The creativity is again about how we communicate that message, giving more hooks. There's so many different learning styles out there. Some people learn quite well through listening to a speech, which is somewhat what a sermon is like. But there's a lot of us that we'll tune in, we'll tune out, we'll tune in, and it depends on at what point we tuned in, whether or not we got what it was that we were supposed to get out of that. So there's other...
Which is why I use big words and long sentences when I'm speaking, so that you can't tune out. What's he really trying to say? I guess I have to pay attention anyway. Sorry.
So we'll try to put in more hooks, more ways of communicating the same message, so that more learning styles can grasp onto it. We will, in connection with excellence and accessibility, we'll try to remove the distractions. which is kind of weird since we're in a kitchen that's sort of full of distractions, but that's okay. That's everything's an experiment, right? But you know, if there's a loud buzz in the sound system, how many people are going to be distracted enough by that loud buzz in the sound system to not actually hear what it is that they're supposed to be hearing? If the lyrics, and I know I messed up a couple times earlier today, but
You messed up.
if the lyrics don't match up with what's being sung, then you know that's something that can be a distraction, and we work on figuring out how to fix that.
You might not have messed up on the lyrics. I might have just sang the wrong verse.
Well, there was another part where I messed up, so there you go. Yeah, but it's about improving the penetration of the message and the retention of the message. I did an experiment one time where I was going out to lunch with some guys after a church service, and they were talking about, that was a good service and all that sort of thing. And I said to them, okay, that's interesting. So we're about 20 minutes after the service has ended. What was the sermon about? And there was this long pause. And after about 5 minutes of the three of them kind of piecing it together, they were able to come up with what the sermon was about. Now, this was 20 minutes after the service had ended. That was the degree of penetration and retention. What are the odds that you're going to remember anything about it 2 weeks from then? Mm-hmm. So by making things more creative and kind of giving those hooks to kind of sink into your brain and allow you to retain it a little bit more, that's really what we're hoping to do with that.
Cool. One of the because I've helped out because I've worked for the past 7 years in a Pentecostal environment. One of the things that we ran into, depending on what flavor of Pentecostal you were a part of, they kind of poo-pooed the excellence part. They're like, well, why don't we just go with the flow and with the spirit and whatever? You're wasting too much time trying to get it perfect. You're wasting too much effort trying to make the message sexy. The message can just stand on its own, blah, blah, blah. What would you say to people that genuinely feel like trying to make the message of Christ appealing or sexy is just a waste of time?
Well, sexy is a dangerous word. So I won't touch that one. Appealing is a good word. Appealing is a better word, I think. So, it's, if you're not, people talk about a church that is trying to do things creatively and with excellence as being an attractional church, and how terrible a thought that is that a church would want to be attractional, and it's like if you're not, if nobody's attracted to you. If people are turned off by you, that seems to be the other alternative. That doesn't seem to be an effective way of reaching as many people as you can with this really important story that they need to hear. So, it's not that, well, I don't want to dabble too much with Marshall McLuhan about the medium is the message or anything like that, because I don't really agree with that. Because the creativity, the way that we communicate the message, that needs to change according to what it is that works for today. The way that Paul went into a city and talked to people there, the way that Jesus spoke and taught, that worked for that time. And if Jesus were to come here, he would still make it work today, don't get me wrong. But we're not Jesus, and we have to take a look at the forms that will be effective today, and don't adapt the message, just adapt the way that we're communicating it.
Yes, it's one of the interesting things. People, I never understood this story in the Bible when Jesus goes into the temple and drives everybody out with a whip. I never understood that. I never understood it until I heard someone say it, that Jesus was actually preaching a message by his actions, that he was telling, he was actually moving his story forward in a very forceful and disruptive way, but that message stuck. and he uses all sorts of creative ways. Jesus himself uses all sorts of creative ways to get his message out. I think if he's the blueprint for what we're supposed to do, I have absolutely no problem with trying to harness what we're the resources that we have to make the message that he has given us sticky.
Yeah, I mean, he used so many metaphors and just things that people were really familiar with.
Yes.
From their everyday lives in order to kind of connect the message into their lives. I mean, we can stand up and give a really dry lecture about propitiation or something like that, but that doesn't make your heart swell. That doesn't give you an emotional reaction. That doesn't necessarily change your perspective.
Googling propitiation.
When you come out of a service at Pivot 613, we really hope that your heart did swell, that you were made curious, that maybe you were made angry enough to go and research or find out for yourself. Maybe it was just a slight change in perspective. If we've accomplished that, then it means that you've engaged with the story, and that's really important for us.
Mm-hmm. How are we going to achieve this without burning people out?
That's tough. Every church that attempts to do creativity with excellence, they have to find their way of their path to do that. It depends a lot on the personnel that you have available, the resources that you have available, the skill sets. Really, it's about being conscious and realistic about the resources that you have available. It's a tough mark to hit. It all happens in team. If I was the only one doing creative stuff for Pivot, it would all end up being superheroes and Star Wars, and that would appeal to a certain demographic, but it would be me and a couple of other geeks. So, you do these sorts of things in team. You do these sorts of things in team so that you've got broader perspectives, so that you can kind of watch, is that too much? Does that actually add anything, or is that getting a little extreme, or is that, we've already had instances 10 weeks in. Mm-hmm. We've had 2 or 3 services where there was another element or two that we were considering adding in. And people said, we don't really need that in this service. Let's save that for another time. Mm-hmm. So when you're doing it in team, and when you're consciously aware of what your realistic resources are, then that kind of helps you find that target. But it's a tough target to hit, and you got to be careful about it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. As a shameless plug for Pivot 613, we've had some really interesting things happen. Like I remember the red pill, blue pill service. Now, obviously, I'm the one who's done all the teaching since we started. So, but yeah, I don't. It's weird. Like even pastors do not remember. Even preachers do not remember all the sermons they've given. But I do. I really enjoyed doing the red pill, blue pill service. I really enjoyed the service 2 weeks later where we had the red and blue films, and we had like a sheet of paper with text in different colors. So we try to make our services creative and memorable.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's it for part 1. You can find part 2 at pivot613.ca. Just look for the podcast links and it will be listed right there. Thanks for checking it out, and let us know if you've got any comments or questions. You can do that by firing us a message at info@pivot613.ca, or you can get in touch with us on Twitter, where our handle is @pivot613.